today is going to focus on your anti-Semitism and the question of Iran. So Uzi, it's a privilege to welcome you back.
Okay, so good morning. Actually, I got some emails from some of you actually with some queries, and I invite you to actually come up with that while in discussion. Today, that's just being more specific regarding Israel and the Middle East, maybe regarding Europe and the Middle East, Israel in between. It goes without saying that the fierce rival of Israel in the last decades, since 1979, is definitely the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, let me just give you kind of a short overview in order to, let's say, give you an idea of how things have been portrayed by Israel throughout the 20th century up to today's. Iran and Turkey, if you remember, we talked about that yesterday, were the only states in the region who defied and challenged the equation of church and state. It was Ataturk, as we said yesterday, who tried actually to separate church and state and come up with kind of a modern Turkey which is challenging the instrumentality or the dominance of the state. And he was followed by Reza Khan. Reza Khan was the first Shah in Iran. The last Shah was the Shah which was toppled in 1979, Muhammad Reza Shah. Reza Khan was his father. So basically what we got here is both Turkey and Iran, non-Arab actors, challenging tradition and religion, and trying to develop what was called a modern state, definitely in accordance with the art of state building which is practiced by the West. Technology, well-equipped army, not parliaments in the sense of the West, but definitely what we can say actually a Western-oriented state when it comes to its technology, interactions, and its position in the region and the world. For Israel, or tiny Israel in 1948, those two were from the beginning potential allies. Why? Because they emphasized the secular motive of human existence. They didn't use the cultural, religious dimension by which to differentiate themselves from the others. So Israel was to be given birth in 1948, with kind of an understanding that aligning yourself with the non-Arab state, Turkey, Iran, you can add Ethiopia, that was to create a triangle which wraps up the Middle East, comprised of non-Arab states, and create what actually was depicted by the Israeli foreign minister in the 50s and the 60s, the peripheral alliance, the periphery of the Middle East. Non-Arab states were to become potential allies of Israel, by which to minimize actually the danger which is posed by Arab states enveloping Israel. This is why 1979 constituted a breach in the geopolitical chessboard for Israel. Because 1979 was to change Iran from a monarchical regime to an Islamic republic. And that was the first time in the 20th century where Islam became not only the formal basic of law and constitution, now for all means and purposes, a major state in the Middle East was to become an Islamic republic. And basically that served a watershed in the region itself. Why? Because this year, 1979, brought in three main developments that were to change dramatically the whole region. And basically this year, 1979, is the point of departure to the understanding of nowadays Middle East. 1979. Three main developments. The first of which, look at this because this is kind of geopolitical chessboard, which is very, very interesting. Until the 70s, the state that was to lead the anti-Israel campaign, the jewel of the Arab world, was Egypt. Egypt was ruled by Nasser in the 50s and the 60s. Nasser came up with the idea of Arab nationalism, a secular ideology because it's based on language and ethnicity, but still wrapped up with Islamic motives. And the first promise Nasser made in the 50s and the 60s was to save the Palestinians and to take revenge of the 1948, what actually Arabs and Palestinians call a Nakba. Nakba is sort of a catastrophe that was inflicted upon the Palestinians with the creation of Israel. So if you would like actually to deal with the opposed mirrors in the Middle East, when Israel is celebrating its independence, Palestinians are memorizing their Nakba or catastrophe. This is why actually in Arabic many would say يوم استقلالكم يوم نكبتنا. The day of your independence reminds us of our sorrow. And basically from the beginning, 1948 was to become year by year kind of, as I said before, crossroads or watershed with which to understand actually the two sides of the river's banks. Now, what happened in 1979 is change of the guard. Egypt, until then, was the most vitriolic in its campaign against Israel, was to be led by Anwar Sadat in the 70s, and this guy for the first time came up with something which was unheard of in the Arab world. With all respect to struggle against Israel, we have a state to run. I'm just making a long story short. This is what Sadat has in mind, or had in mind. Of course, when Sadat came to the Knesset, the Israeli Knesset in 1977, that was something so big, because this was not only an Arab leader representing the greatest Arab state coming to Israel speaking about peace, and of course, later on, from then on, what was left is just mere history. We are still here, 40 years after almost. The peace is still there, at least the agreement. Again, we said yesterday that peace is kind of a word which is very, very questionable when it comes to that kind of relations, but definitely the agreement is there. The irony was that while Egypt turned from black to white in the eyes of Israel, at the same year, Iran was to be turned from white to black with regard to Israel. So it is as if there was a switch here. Egypt took the role of Iran, one time Iran took the role of one time Egypt. And from then on, we got kind of an Islamic republic that somebody has to get closer into the mind of the Ayatollahs in order to understand actually why Iran was to develop that way. At the same time, the same year, another development, very critical, is, let's see if we can, here. You know what, let's just stay with this, just to make sure that we are coming from Afghanistan. Afghanistan was to be invaded by the USSR, and this was the beginning of a huge saga, a real imbroglio, under which actually Al-Qaeda fighters were to actually find or create their base in Afghanistan, and here comes the whole chessboard of the Middle East. Just 1 year, many changes, and the one who would like actually to give himself kind of an idea of what's going on should really be updated about the recent developments and create kind of a new chessboard which is definitely fit to the 1979 events. So, let's deal with Al-Qaeda first in order to understand where all these come from. Al-Qaeda is a bunch of Arab Islamists who either found shelter in Afghanistan because they were expelled from their own countries, Egypt, Jordan, and other countries. It is very, very interesting to see that pro-Western Arab states were to expel Islamists, and they found shelter in Saudi Arabia first. Thereafter, actually, they were sent themselves into the region of war in Afghanistan in order to save an Islamic State from the invasion of the infidels, USSR, communist. This is, of course, something like a red flag in the eyes of many, many Islamists, because communism means atheism, and this is much more problematic than Christianity or even Judaism. So there was a wake-up call for all Muslims who would like to save Islam to shift themselves toward Afghanistan and to create an Arab belt, Qaeda, which was to support the Afghan Mujahideen. Mujahideen, jihad. So what we have here is Afghani tribes wrap themselves up with the cloak of jihad, fighting the Soviets, but also supported by Arabs who were pariah in their own states, creating Al-Qaeda, and this was to become in 1988 kind of a mere fact, Al-Qaeda being run by Osama bin Laden, a Saudi billionaire. Again, I mean, we don't have time to elaborate on that, but I was asked yesterday about Saudi Arabia. Remember that the Bin Laden family is not a family in the Western sense of the word. This is a huge economic tycoon. The father of the family actually was one of the people of the close entourage of the founder of Saudi Arabia, King Ibn Saud, or Abdul Aziz Ibn Saud. And in Saudi Arabia, the society is being melted, I would say, by the blood ties and intermarriage interactions of, let's say, leading families. So what comes first in Saudi Arabia and the Gulfian states to a large extent is not who you are, but what is your family, well, I mean, which family you are belonging to. That is very, very tribalistic in nature. So when we are getting inside the Arabian Peninsula, if we would like to add something to the things that we said yesterday, we have to be equipped with what we call actually tribalistic politics. Because that is definitely the one thing that should be discerned and be taken into account while dealing with that. I want you to look at this because, you know, this is the upheaval that created actually what we see today. First of all, Salafiyya plus jihad. Remember, we talked about Salafism. We talked about the Muslim brothers that were founded in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna in Egypt. Thereafter, there were branches of the brothers in Gaza, which was to become Hamas, Muslim brothers in Jordan, in Syria. But it's very important actually to put them right on the spectrum. Political Islam, or Muslim brothers, were to get control over countries or states with the passage of time. The notion was da'wah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Both.
It will take time, but we are in the right direction. Those people who were together in Afghanistan fed up with that very, very gradual process. What they decided is to bring it in, and this is basically the actual point where Salafism and Jihad were to be merged together in order to create movements like Qaeda and thereafter ISIS. Afghanistan is the place where everything was to begin. So, on the one hand, in the stead of the network or the net of states and nation states, from Afghanistan, what was to rise is the flag of fundamentalist Sunni Islam. And alongside with that, the same year was to see the rise of Messianic Shiism in Iran. So this was the year where the Middle East was to be changed dramatically from a set of states to something which is to be measured by culture and religion. So just for example, there was a war between two Muslim states from 1980 to 1989. It was called the Iran-Iraq War. Political scientists took it as a bilateral war. Why? They have mutual boundaries. And that could be explained economically, geopolitically, or whatever. But if you are using the cultural, religious layer, the Iran-Iraq war was to start the renewal of the Sunni Shiite thing. Iran, Shiite, Iraq, full of Shiites, but being controlled and seized by Sunnis. Saddam Hussein, which on top of his being Sunni, was also a member of the Ba'ath party, which is definitely inspired by communist and socialist ideas, kind of a pure kafir in Shi'i sense. And that was the longest war in the 20th century in the Middle East, 8 years. Not between Israel and Arabs. Muslims versus Muslims. Or if you would like to have, and you would come with me back to times immemorial, it's not only Sunnis versus Shiites, it's Arabs versus Persians. Which this is something that you can find 3 millennia ago as kind of a basic conflict that characterized the whole history of the region of what we call the Persian Gulf. By the way, this is Persian Gulf. In Persian, it is expressed like Khalij Fars. Khalij Fars. This is the international also name given to this waterway. But if you're going to use actually Arab maps of the Gulf in Saudi Arabia and Iraq, you would say Al-Khalij Al-Arabi, which is the Arab Gulf, not the Persian Gulf. And this is not kind of a semantic issue. Again, if you are digging into the water of this waterway, you will find kind of a set of conflicts between Arabs, Persians, Sunni, Shiites, etc. So what we have seen here is the renewal of much of the accumulated, I would say, burden of history being floated in the Persian Gulf and beyond. Take into account that in the 70s also, the Britain, which was still ruling the Persian Gulf, was to evacuate the region. So there was kind of a geopolitical contest between the three big, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, on who is going to run the Gulf. So this is very important for me actually to tell you, because you know, I mean, many people actually explain the history of the Middle East, especially in the 20th century, while following actually 1948, 1967, 1973, 1982. I mean, actually it is becoming kind of a chronology of the wars Israel actually conducted with the Arabs. What we got here is kind of another offer by which to balance things and look at things as kind of, I would say, kind of a set which is much more problematic and should be seen from different angles. So while the Iran-Iraq war can be seen as kind of a separate war, well, this was the opening of the gate of hell, basically. Sunnah and Shia were to come to the fore, and nobody knows nowadays how you're going to solve it out. I happen to see many, many friends, Americans and Europeans, who ask me time and again, how can we solve out the dispute or the conflict between Sunnis and Shiites? A Western question. Why? It seems as if Sunnis owe something to the Shiites that was taken deliberately or vice versa. So this is a very mechanic understanding of the conflict. Conflict is being based on materials. What you have to do is just to bring it back, and things are going actually to status quo ante. There is nothing to be brought back when it comes to Sunna and Shia. Nothing. It's a folkloristic, cultural, religious animosity that comes from times immemorial. Of course, when I wrote about that 15 years ago, and I've been to Germany. I think it was, it was Germany, and there was a kind of a presentation given by me actually about the Sunnah and Shia, and I remember actually what was said by a professor who is specializing in Islam. And you know, the German Academy is full of specialists when it comes to classical Islam and the origins of Islam, and they are really actually first class or first rate researchers. But again, it is very problematic to implement your theoretical understandings and knowledge when it comes to real life if you haven't got a clue about how things are going to run in real life. And I was to get kind of, let's say, I was to get kind of an, thank you, Professor, for your well-delivered presentation, but we cannot forget that you are an Israeli professor, which is right, who would like to belittle the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and create kind of a conflict which is basically is not there, but you are so biased that you are bringing it to the fore. That was very interesting because I wrote this article about the Arab fears, Iranian threats, and even in Israel actually nobody thought that this is something that should be taken seriously. Passing phenomena. After all of them are Muslims. So this makes actually life easier when you are coming up with kind of a broad strokes, and when you use those categories without getting into the complications or complexities that must be found there. The rest is history. Why do I say folkloristic? Because when I was in Doha, and I visited Doha several times, the capital city of Qatar, I remember once when I asked actually one of the hosts, Arab of course, what is that you are so suspicious and so hostile when somebody is mentioning Iran and the Shia? I really wanted to understand that. And then I understood that their reply is not to be given in rational terms. It is folklore, emotions, whatever. They said this is kind of a rhetoric question. There is no answer to that. This is an axiom. This is how they are. They are evil, they are cunning, they are shrewd, they are not to be trusted, and beware of them. What are you going to do with that? This is not something to be sold out by negotiation. How can I persuade you that I'm not the guy you say I am? How can we change kind of a fixed ideas that were installed in the mind of many since their childhood. Remember, if you would like to solve out the problems of the Middle East, start with educational revolution. Don't look for a messiah, either Netanyahu, Abu Mazen, Sisi, whatever, that would come with a kind of a winning formula to solve all the problems. Educational revolution. The problem with that is that the outcome, the positive outcome, is not to be seen tomorrow. So we are doing that for next generations, not for ourselves. Are we ready for that? I'm not sure. Because we would like to have an instant peace. There is, of course, in Israel, a kind of a movement which is called Shalom Achshav. It's not only peace, which is a pie in the sky, it's a peace now. Now! Which means that you have here very childish and infantile movement who is not willing to hear even about these complexities, about these difficulties. They would like to have it now, and the sooner the better. This is very dangerous. Why? Not because peace is dangerous. Not at all. All of us would like actually to have kind of a place for themselves and their family, better future and safer future. That's natural. The problem is that it is always something that would or should be understood in the sense of it takes two to tango. And we don't even have one player or one dancer. It's the Americans and the Europeans who are dancing. The whole world is dancing, talking about peace. The belligerents in the Middle East even don't have that possibility in mind. So the gap is unreachable, and the gap is conceptual. And we are required actually to get into this gap and to use it. Otherwise, we are coming up with a very artificial reading of the reality, which is very, very dangerous, of course. Two things about Iran, and I'll try to be brief about that. What happened in 1979 is not only the toppling of the Shah. This was an Islamic revolution. And Ayatollah Khomeini was to come from France by an Air France airplane. He had no army at all. This was the first time that the West actually was so bewildered and astonished to see that the conspiracy theories were to rise and skyrocketing. Who stands behind them? You're not going to tell me that that kind of revolution can be made without tanks and airplanes and conventional army. The Americans were of the opinion that the Reds should be found behind communists. And they gathered that with the USSR invasion to Afghanistan, which is adjacent to Iran. So that was actually become in their mind kind of a domino effect, which is definitely being run by the Soviets. But Khomeini, once he came into Iran, declared that what he has to actually declare from the beginning, this is Jamhuriya Islami. Jamhuriya Islami, Islamic Republic. What does that mean? That we do not tilt neither to the west nor to the east. we are the third fresh international clique. Neshark, Nerar, which means neither east, nor east in the sense of USSR, nor west, Jamhuriya Islami faqat. It is just an Islamic republic. So what does that mean? We haven't had that kind of a thing before. How are we going to grasp this whole initiative? And in the new flag of the Islamic Republic, two slogans were to be written on the wall from the beginning, which could have explained to us what Jamhuriya Islami is. The first of which is that the ruler has to be a brilliant cleric, grand Ayatollah. So the Islamic Republic said loud and clear, we are not going to let regular people, kings or whatever, to run state and societies. Only the knowledgeable religious cleric would lead the state. This is called in Persian, Velayat al-Faqih, the rule of the jurisprudence. So until today, the supreme leader in Iran is not the president. Don't make a mistake about that. It's not Rouhani, it's not Javad Zarif, it's not the government. These are civil servants, not more than that. The supreme leader, by all means and proposes, is Grand Ayatollah, Ayatollah Uzma in Persian, Ali Khamenei. Not Khomeini, which was the founder of, but Ali Khamenei. So when you hear about elections in Iran, and you praise the democracy in Iran, remember that the elections are not going actually to decide or to vote for who is going to rule Iran in terms of ayatollahs. Only ayatollahs would dictate who would be the ayatollah who is going to run the state. So this is a very limited democracy in the sense of that. You can vote, but you are not necessarily can be elected. You have to be approved by the ayatollahs if you would like to become civil servant, foreign minister, prime minister, or whatsoever. That for one. Second, the problem with this Islamic revolution was that from the early day, from its outset, it declared that the revolution is not to be confined to the Iranian perimeter. Not at all. And what they came up, and there was the second slogan on the flag of the Islamic Republic, Sudur Engela, which means exportation of the revolution. For that purpose, what was to be created is what we call and know Pastaran, which is revolutionary guards. This is kind of a satellite which is following closely what's going on in the neighborhood. And once you have kind of a weak link, like Shiites in broken Lebanon, or Shiites nowadays in Yemen or in Iraq, you are going actually to appropriate local Shia, which basically is deprived of economic and political rights, support it, and create kind of a proxy for yourself all over the place. So this map is misleading because it is fraught with pro-Iranian Shia militias almost everywhere. And this map cannot read that. It does not specify that. The other thing that had become an industry, and this is how things come to Israel, is to make sure that the revolution's burners are being refueled time and again. For that purpose, Israel was kind of a precious asset for the Iranian Ayatollahs. Because from the beginning, when you are trying to say how different you are from your predecessor, you are just committed to revolution. You have to persuade people about the advantages of your revolution. The first thing that a revolutionist would do is to snipe at the ancien regime, to tease the ancien regime and to show how different he is in comparison to the ancien regime. Where the ancien regime, the Shah, was very, very pro-Western and very, very friendly to Israel. The best way for me to show how different I am in comparison to the Shah is to be anti-American and anti-Israeli. Let alone that goes in line with what Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the revolution, had written in his book, which was compiled before the revolution, and brought in Shia messianic understandings about how the world is being comprised. There are two species in that world. Shia said, on the one hand, the deprived, mahrumin or mustaz'afin in Persian. On the other hand, the usurpers, mustakbarin. And this was not only an Islamic, Shiite Islamic revolution. It was also very socio-political in its nature, because it also approached the deprived people saying that from now on, we are going to get the upper hand. And what we are trying to do here is to bring in salvation for the deprived. Who are the usurpers? Who are the evils of this world? This is written word by word in Hukamat al-Islam, the book that was actually compiled by Khomeini. USSR, well, that goes without saying. Communists. But I think that if we are looking for kind of, I would say, a rebirth of classical anti-Semitism, which was seen in Europe long before, and was to reconstruct it and brought in into the Shia Islamic thought, it would be that book. Well, the world, said Khomeini, unfortunately, is being ruled by Satans. Satans. Of course, like in the Bible, also in the Quran, Satan has a very convoluted way which ordinary human being cannot trace and follow. You have to be an expert, a real expert when it comes to Satan. The thing is that Khomeini immediately targeted the great Satan. The great Satan was definitely the United States of America. Shaitan Bozorg. This is how it is expressed in Persian. The problem is, if there is a Shaitan Bozorg, if there is a great Satan, there must be a little Satan here or there. And the little Satan, how surprising, Shaitanic cheek. Was Israel. And that was to actually be gathered through this whole history that was portrayed by many Arabs, Muslims, that Israel is not a mere coincidence. Israel was created in 1948 in tandem with the Western evacuation of the Middle East. So basically, Israel is a leftover of the grand dinner or meal the West had in the Middle East. A bridge through which to always return when it is needed to reuse Middle Eastern resources. So basically the primordial sin of Israel in the eyes of Islamists is not necessarily its Jewishness, as many think. Because many would think that the primordial sin is Judaism. Well, that's a sin. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is that Israel is part of a grand design, a conspiration. It is the ugly tail of the Western dog. I'm just quoting Khomeini, it's not my words. So now Israel was to be taken from the beginning. From the beginning. As kind of an essence which is antagonizing. Totally different, the opposite of what Islam has preached for ages. So what I'm trying to give you, I offer to look at things, and I have had so many meetings with people of the region to be pretty confident while putting it that way. It's not scientific, actually, my understanding, because I don't know how to measure culture and religion, and to what extent we are able actually to have an exact saying about them, but it is there. I remember I used to live 3 months in Egypt, in Cairo. I went to Dar al-Kutub just to gather materials, and my mom, who came from Iraq, as I told you yesterday, she told me, please don't kill me. Don't do that. Don't go to Egypt. I know them. What does that mean, I know them? What does that mean, I know them? This is something that tells you that, you can definitely be an expert on the Middle East, but believe me, you know nothing. when it comes to the real things, I know them. Who are they? The Arabs. What do you know them, Mom, which I don't know? First of all, don't present yourself. Don't introduce yourself as a Jew. Why? There was no answer. This is it. If you ask me why, it means that you are far away from what's going on there. It is so obvious that there is no reason to ask why. And I mean, there was 25 years ago, when actually the winds of spring were there with the Oslo agreement. Peace was at the gate. People were promised in Israel that we have crossed the no return line. With my lips, no return line. Yes, there will be conflicts. Yes, there are many disputes, but all of them are going to be solved out at negotiating around the table. No need of battlefields anymore. And basically, I was trying to persuade my mother. And you know, because we are Jews, and you know, we have our psyche too. We talked about that yesterday. Just to be on the safe side, why should I introduce myself as a Jew if I speak Arabic and I'm coming from Palestine? Just for the sake of my mom, I was to introduce myself as a guy coming, not from Herzliya, of course, because that is very, very Israeli. Akka, which is Acre. And I met wonderful young Egyptians who were at my age then. They hosted me. I learned a lot there in Egypt. But you know, actually I was, for them, a Palestinian. And I have to tell you that before I left, I felt very, very bad about that. Because I respected those guys who hosted me and were so nice and generous. So I decided to tell them who I am. And I first told them that, you know, I'm not the guy you thought I am. And one of them, Munir, says, I knew that. He said, هذا مسيحي. Which means he is Christian. There are Arabs who are Christians. And I said, it's neither that. So what are you? He asked me. I told him that I am a Jew. And you know what he said? Bukra fil mishmish. I know how a Jew is looked like. You can't be Jew. What I'm trying actually to just bring in is the you know, set of stereotypes you have here, which is much greater than reality itself. And it is so well entrenched there that if you would like to deal with that, you have again, as I said before, start up with educational revolution, respecting the other. You have to teach about the other. You have to know who the other is. Otherwise, it remains obscure as something not to be even understood because it is an ultimate evil. You know, when Ali Khamenei, I'm just bringing him to a different level, when he was asked actually about Trump's coming to the fore, and you know, when Trump came to the fore, there were accusations within the Iranian parliament against Rouhani and Zarif, who actually orchestrated this whole thing with the United States. This is the nuclear deal and all that stuff. And Ali Khamenei said, well, I am not surprised. I said from the beginning that you should expect nothing when you are dealing with an ultimate evil. And America is an ultimate evil. Now, we can take it as a gimmick, but here is the thing. These guys do believe in what they say. These guys do believe in what they say. That's the problem. Of course, the main thing that we have seen there while dealing with Iran, and remember that there was that guy Ahmadinejad, and of course there was a day-by-day kind of, I would say, a slogan which was heard time and again in Iran, almost every morning. It's not only that they do the parades of the Quds Day. Quds Day is Jerusalem Day. It's not only that they are doing actually those, let's say, festivities which are commemorating the Shiite suffering from 680. It is called Ashura, when they beating and hitting themselves until they bleed them, actually. It's not that. It is that the new pariah for them was Israel. And there were two things that were made about Israel. First of all, Israel Bayad Ma'asharat. What is Israel Bayad Ma'asharat? It means that Israel should be evaporated in no time. Israel should not exist. It hasn't got the right to exist. It's not that let's sit and see how we're going to get a compromise. Remember that. It's questioning the right of Israel to exist. And it's still there until nowadays. You want here an Ayatollah mentioning the name Israel. By the way, the deposed president in Egypt, Morsi, was to rule 1 year. We were following his speeches desperately, trying to find even one time the word Israel. Not even one time. It's kind of a Zionite entity, Kayhan Zayur. The same goes in, of course, with Sisi it's totally different because I explained that yesterday. But what happened in Iran is that a president, elected president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, turned it into an industry. And there were two main facets, or two main dimensions in this industry. The first of which is denying the Holocaust. Denying the Holocaust. Why? If Israel is a byproduct of the Holocaust, if I am going to undermine the story of the Holocaust, I'm going to undermine the very existence of Israel. Simple as that. So Ahmadinejad didn't say that there was no Holocaust, but it was not 6 million. Just omit 1 0. It should be 500,000 or 600,000. And many others suffer much more than that. This is what he said. Second, okay, Jews suffered in Europe. Why should Palestinians pay the price? Take Alsace-Lorraine, or whatever, and create a Jewish state or state for the Jews there. Let Germany pay. Let France pay, or whatever. Vichy government. Not France. Not the resistance. I think that was very, very interesting to see what happened there. Because at the same time, many, I would say, agents of the industry denying the Holocaust were more than welcome in Iran. Ahmadinejad actually did many exhibitions in Tehran or in Isfahan, introducing actually the merchandise of Holocaust denial. And that goes on until today, even in a more modest manner, because Rouhani and Zarif are, I would say, attacking with their charm, attacking the West with the charm. This is called the charming attack or the charm attack. They are very romantic. They know English, which is very important when it comes to the West. Fluent speakers in English. If you are that fluent in English, you can't be that problematic when it comes to religion. And when we got actually this in the city, second thing was, of course, the nuclear activity. And, you know, there was a debate in Israel 20 years ago how serious Iran is. Iran goes nuclear. Ahmadinejad is being portrayed and photoed day by day with helmets nearby the centrifuges, speaking and saying loud and clear, we are going nuclear. And the day after he says Israel should not exist. Now, my American friends always told me that you must understand that this is not inherent. This is instrumental. Many Arab states actually even claim that. What Arab states said, he is not going for Israel. What they are doing is, in their aim to crush the Arab state, they are legitimizing themselves by talking about Israel. So don't worry. You can tell that to anxious Jews. They won't accept that. What does that mean, inherent or instrumental? You want me to put it to the test? You really want me to count on your assessment that this is instrumental and not inherent? Well, I offered actually whoever suggested that he should try first that on himself. If it is instrumental, he would come to tell me. If it was inherent, he won't come. Just like that. So, I mean, you can talk about Israel as kind of a laboratory of attempts or whatever, or sort of exercising experiences. No. You have to understand, in Israel there are many people who are really frightened and afraid, even if they are not aware of that, because it is part of the psyche of what's going on in the neighborhood. And you can't blame them because of their historical experience and because what's going on in the neighborhood is really, really problematic. We just said that Bashar al-Assad has slaughtered his own people with chemical weapons. I won't let you even imagine what would have happened if he were a little bit much stronger than Israel. I'll tell you what would have happened. There was no Israel anymore. And this is kind of a truth that I dare say that most Israelis are fully agree with, left and right. The moment that Israel won't have the military technological advantage, it is under the danger of extinction, sorry. Extinction.
You mean extinction of the state or genocide of the people?
Of the state. Of the state. And Jews actually were always wandering throughout the world. So, you know, we Jews actually have sort of a very, very black humor when we talk about the demolition of the third temple. So we've been there. Once again, let's go to the diaspora. The thing is that now we can't think of that anymore. This is why Israel is so precious for Jews. This is why Israel should be not a Jewish state, maybe, and I definitely go against this thing. It is a state for the Jewish people. A state for the Jewish people. Because when you say Jewish state, what people portray in their mind is a halachic, traditional state. It's a state for the Jewish people, or of the Jewish people. And of course, again, there are minorities whom we do respect, and we should protect, and we should provide them with whatever they need. Druze, Circassians, Armenians, Palestinians, with all difficulties. How are you going to do that? That's a really tough march. But we have to be there if we would like to preserve Israel as a state for the Jewish people and at the same time remain the only democracy in the Middle East. Look at what's going on in Turkey. Many friends of the Turkish academia are actually fleeing from Turkey or being put in prison. The Sultan actually is acting. Erdogan. Look at Iran. So what we have now is kind of a change of the atmosphere or the climate here. And that comes from 1979, because Al-Qaeda was to become ISIS in Iraq. And if you ask me, what happened in Iraq in the post-2003, how ISIS came to be so strong, it was assisted by many people who used to be officers in the Sunni army of Saddam Hussein. They knew the place. They were pretty able with using the ammunition and the weaponry that was left by the Americans. And this is how ISIS became sort of an amalgam of sword and book. So I think we can stop here. Is that okay? And if you have questions or something that you would like me to elaborate on, yes, please.
Sometimes it's very difficult to understand that so many intelligent people, leaders of the Western world, cannot follow or understand your way of thinking or the concepts about the Arab world. So it looks like we are in many centuries ago when most of the people on earth were in mass consciousness, so they were following a leader. But leaders now are in a huge number all over. So how can, or what did Israel did in the past with all this knowledge in order to make the world leaders understand that they have to shift the way of thinking and they have to look things from a different perspective? Because apparently Obama's administration, Trump's administration, whatever you said about Germany is a very square way of thinking. Dangerous at the same time.
First of all, you know, Israel until 1967 was to be the David of the Middle East. The David of the Middle East. After 1967, it became the Goliath, and the Palestinians became the David. Now, if you are a Goliath, it is very, very, you're being portrayed as a Goliath. It is very, very difficult actually to do your campaign while you are the strongest party or the stronger party when it comes to the conflict. That for me. Second, in many European states, there is a growing lobby of Palestinians and Muslims who constitute a huge I would say, power when it comes to the elections and constituencies. So I found myself in Scandinavia, in some West European states, talked to some people who are part of the mechanism of policy makers, and between the lines or beneath the lines, what I heard is kind of nuances that, well, we have to take into account that these people could vote against us if and when we are this and that. Some put it bluntly, and I would like you to hear that, Charles, because this is very interesting. Some said, small talks, not publicly, of course. You know, in public you can hear nothing because it's just nothings. Small talks is the right place where you can hear some things. How about that? I was shocked when I heard that, but when I heard it, but later on I must, must admit that that makes a sense. So you would like us to support 6 or 7 million people, when on the other side we have hundreds of millions. How stupid that would be, politically and geopolitically speaking. That makes a sense. Just like that, it was put on the table. And I had to agree, because, you know, it's against the stream if you are going to support Israel. So we have many, many problems in Israel. Israel has many, many problems while trying to explain itself because of all these things. Now, what I can tell you is that nobody thinks the way the West thinks deliberately. What I'm trying to tell you, this is the way of the victorious. This is the way of the victorious shaping his mind. You know, if I am the victorious part, Britain, France, mission civilisatrice, Great Britain, I know what they should do. They don't understand. They are the natives, you know. And since I am the best, and since my system is the best, if I'm going to implement my system there, it's a win-win situation. They're going to be benefited from that, and me too, because I'm going to deal with people who are familiar with my notions. You know, you don't have time. The victorious does not think about the other in terms of culture and ideology. Why? Because he is the victorious. And this is a very cynical and cruel world. I'm not blaming here, believe me, it's not a blame game. You know, I mean, if I'm going to talk about Israelis and Palestinians, and I did it a lot, and I explain it to our policymakers and people of the Foreign Office, you're not coming up with, we are the righteous part, they to be blamed, period. This is not an explanation. So we are not dealing with blame game. That would be a mistake. What we have to do is to explain what we are saying. To explain what we are saying. To make you much more knowledgeable about the way he thinks about himself. Not what you should think about him by your own standards. So my job or my mission is to bring my students to the back of the mind of their topic under review. For example, after Protective Edge was a war in Gaza between Israel and the Hamas. Hamas waged the war against Israel. because he was so desperate, and he thought that worse than what he had then cannot be actually the same. I mean, after the war, something he hoped would change or would happen in favor of them. And you know, I was invited to the parliament in Canada, in Ottawa, to deliver a speech about what they call protective edge. A day before the presentation, I got a phone call from the Speaker of the Parliament. Not the Speaker, sorry, the administrative coordinator or something. And he said, "Dear Professor, will you be so kind as to change your presentation's topic?" Well, I was brought in, actually, they paid a lot of money for that. You know, chutzpah is basically something which is very, very familiar with, Israeli culture. I should have been chutzpan, which means to say, what is that? How come? Haven't we agreed on the topic? Why are you coming? No, I said, okay, what would you like to hear tomorrow? And they say, listen, we'd rather you talk about ISIS. ISIS is Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, it's Dayan. Because the Israeli-Palestinian thing is becoming too redundant. Every other year you have kind of an affair there. Talk to us about ISIS. And I talked about ISIS. 1 hour presentation. Let me give you the first comment coming from an MP after the presentation. He said something like, "Wow, that seems very threatening. I wonder what are you going to do about that?" And I asked him, "Who is you?" He said, "Israel, of course." You know why? Because the 20th century taught people that when you have a problem in the Middle East, it would be, to a large extent, the problem of Israel. I said, of course, that it's very strange because I was about to ask you the same question again, and I wonder about that. And he said, "Us? I don't see how or what can relate us to that monster. Hand of God or hidden hand." 3 weeks after that, in the same parliament, in Ottawa, a Canadian of Muslim origin, equipped with a Kalashnikov, murdered the bodyguards there or whatever, and was killed at the threshold of the parliament before he is going to assassinate Canadian MPs. It's not that people deliberately think like that. ISIS was taken as something of the Middle East. The Middle East is kind of a swamp which is so different from us. Thanks God. The problem is that the swamp is exporting the virus again to other states, to other continents. And I'm not sure actually that the other continents are pretty able to deal with that in the right sense, because it has to do with a sharp contrast with the Magna Carta, as we said yesterday, upon which Western societies were to be forged. So we have to just broaden up the scope. It's not that somebody did it deliberately, but this is how it is. We know better than you what should be done. And when I talk to American policymakers after 2003 about Iraq, and I remember that, I just said that, listen guys, it's not what you see on the ground. It's a lot of bad blood, which is coming from times immemorial. You have to take it into account. No, it will be okay. You know what they did in Iraq? They did de-Ba'athification. What is de-Ba'athification? They authorized the new Shi'i government to de-Ba'athize Iraq. Which means when you have an activist of the one-time Ba'ath party, you can execute, prison him or whatever. You know what the Shiites did? They Ba'athized all Sunnis in order to settle the scores with them. And they tried to slaughter Sunnis without even kind of an understanding who is a Ba'athi or not, because they were the enemy. You know what is going on now in Mosul? Mosul was liberated. Yeah, Mosul was liberated. Mosul is full of Sunnis. All Sunnis in Mosul are being accused of being actually ISIS supporters. So they are going to be slaughtered by the Shiites now. So it goes on and on.
Thank you.
So, I know a lot of people have been signaling me for questions, but we're going to take a tea break. And I'll just say very thank you for the presentation very much. I'll just say one interesting tidbit of information. So you know I'm born in Montreal in Canada. And I was in the United States on television, live television, the day the Canadian Parliament was attacked. And somebody asked me about it, so it was unclear. There were reports that the Parliament was in the process of being attacked. And I said to the interviewers, and we had no information, I said, you know, this is being recorded live, it was being streamed live, and it was going to be repeated several times. And I said, I know exactly what's happening. It's going to be an Islamist attack, and then the President of the United States will get on television saying that Canada is our greatest ally, but it's too early to determine what is happening, and it will be denied that it was a terrorist attack by an Islamist radical. And it's exactly what happened. Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada, called a press conference that night at 8 o'clock prime time, and he was amazing. He called it an Islamist terrorist attack, and he traced it to its roots, its intellectual, ideological, and terror roots. 5 minutes before Harper's speech, President Obama had a press conference saying, it's too early to see, we'll stand with Canada, we'll provide all the resources that we can to help Canada, but he sort of sucked the wind.
He still thinks that it's too early.
It's amazing, it's amazing. So the Canadian response is very clear, but you know, the President of the United States is much more powerful, has a wider reach than Stephen Harper.
Would you go say the same thing?
I don't think
Never. Never, right?
as Harper, he's different, but no, he's a all right. Enjoy the tea and coffee. We'll ask you questions.